Imagine for a moment you're in the last days and a list with exactly 144,000 names is revealed. Names of all those who will be sealed by God for final salvation. You search anxiously and find Reuben, Judah, Levi, all of Jacob's sons are there. But wait, where's Dan? Where is Dan's name? Why has an entire tribe simply disappeared? What did Dan do so terrible that not even God could forgive? In the next 40 minutes, I'll reveal 3 reasons that will completely shake everything you thought you knew about the Bible. And I guarantee, after this, you'll never read the prophecies the same way again. To understand Dan's curse, we need to go back to the exact moment when it all began. I'm not just talking about his physical birth. I'm talking about the spiritual birth of something much darker. Rachel was desperate. Imagine this woman's pain, seeing her servant Leah bearing child after child for Jacob, while she remained barren, empty, carrying within her chest a shame that consumed her day and night. It was a society where a woman's identity was directly linked to her ability to bear children. And Rachel was dying inside. Then she made a decision that would change an entire nation's destiny. She gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob and said something that gives me chills just thinking about it. She will give birth upon my knees so that I too may have children through her. Do you perceive the spiritual depth of what was happening there? Rachel was trying to force God's hand, and when Dan was born, Rachel exclaimed, "God has vindicated me, heard my voice, and given me a son." The name Dan literally means he who judges or vindication. But here's the first big problem. Dan wasn't born from patience, faith, or God's promise. Dan was born from manipulation, desperation, the human attempt to control divine plans. From his first breath of life, Dan carried in his spiritual DNA the mark of rebellion against God's will. And that, my brothers, that was just the beginning. Now we go to the most chilling moment of this entire story. Jacob is on his deathbed, gathering his 12 sons to bless them and prophesy about the future of each tribe. One by one, he calls his sons. For Judah, he prophesies royalty. For Joseph, prosperity. For Benjamin, victory in war. But when Dan's turn came, something changed in the air. The atmosphere became heavy. Jacob looked at his son and, with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, declared something that made everyone present's blood freeze. Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels, making its rider fall backward. Can you feel the weight of these words? Jacob didn't just call Dan a serpent. He called him a viper. A treacherous serpent that hides in the path to attack from behind, that bites the heel, causing a deadly and unexpected fall. But the prophecy didn't stop there. Immediately after speaking about Dan, Jacob did something extraordinary. He stopped everything and cried out, "For your salvation I wait, O Lord." It was as if, after prophesying about Dan's treacherous nature, Jacob felt a desperate urgency to cry out for divine salvation, as if he knew he had just prophesied about something terrible to come. And here's something that will make you lose sleep tonight. This prophecy wasn't just about Dan as a person, it was about his entire descendants. It was about an entire tribe that would carry, generation after generation, this mark of the serpent. Through the centuries, the tribe of Dan became known for one thing: idolatry. They were the ones who first introduced idols to Israel. They were the ones who established pagan altars. They were the ones who systematically led God's people away to demon worship. The book of Judges tells us about Micah, who made silver idols. And guess who stole these idols and established a pagan worship center in northern Israel? The tribe of Dan. They didn't just worship idols. They were the merchants of idolatry, spreading apostasy wherever they went. And you know what haunts me most? Throughout the entire period of the Judges, when God raised up deliverers for Israel, never ever did a judge come from the tribe of Dan. Samson was born on the border between Dan and Judah. but belonged to the tribe of Judah. It was as if God had purposely rejected the entire lineage of Dan for spiritual leadership in Israel. Now we come to the first reason why Dan was excluded from the 144,000, and I guarantee this will shake your faith foundations. The tribe of Dan wasn't just idolatrous. They became the gateway, the entry door for all apostasy in Israel. They were the first to systematically break the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." But here's what most people don't know. According to ancient Jewish texts and some rabbinical traditions, it's believed that the Antichrist himself will come from the tribe of Dan. You heard right. The son of perdition, the man of lawlessness, the one who will sit in God's temple proclaiming to be God. According to these traditions, he will have Dan's blood running through his veins. Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, wrote in the 2nd century AD, "For this reason, Dan is not counted in the list of tribes that receive inheritance in Revelation, for it is from the tribe of Dan that he who is opposed to Christ will arise." Now imagine the spiritual depth of this. Jacob prophesied that Dan would be a serpent in the way. Jesus said that Satan is the ancient serpent, and now we discover that possibly the last great enemy of Christ may emerge from this same cursed lineage. But do you want to know something even more chilling? In the book of Revelation, when John lists the 144,000 sealed, he mentions all the tribes of Israel, but instead of Dan, he puts Manasseh. It's as if God had literally erased Dan from the list of the saved and replaced him with another lineage. This wasn't a writing error. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a divine exclusion, purposeful, definitive. Dan was crossed out from the book of life of the sealed tribes. The second reason is even more disturbing because it touches on something we all carry: generational sin. Do you remember how Dan was conceived? Through Rachel's manipulation, the attempt to force God's plans. But what I discovered researching ancient texts left me sleepless for several nights. Dan wasn't just conceived in manipulation. According to some Jewish traditions, Bilhah, Dan's mother, had Canaanite ancestry. This means Dan may have carried from birth blood from the peoples that God had ordered to be completely destroyed. Now understand, I'm not saying this is scientifically proven, but I'm saying that spiritually, this makes terrifying sense. The Canaanites were known for human sacrifices, demon worship, the most abominable occult practices. If Dan really carried this blood, it would explain why his tribe was the first to apostatize. But here's what haunts me most. The book of Exodus declares that God visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. Do the math with me. If Dan was born with a generational curse, how many generations would have to pass for that curse to be completely purified? And you know what the most chilling part is? When we reach the time of Revelation, the time of the 144,000, much more than 4 generations had passed since Dan. But apparently, the curse was so deep, so rooted, that not even time could erase it. It's as if God looked at the tribe of Dan and said, "This lineage is so spiritually corrupted that there's no possible redemption. It needs to be cut forever from my people." This makes me tremble because it makes me think about how many of us might be carrying generational curses we don't even imagine. How many sin patterns, how many destructive tendencies, how many doors open to evil may be operating in our families without us even noticing. And now we come to the third and most devastating reason, and this one will touch your souls in a way you never expected. During Jesus' time, the tribe of Dan had practically disappeared from Israel. They had migrated north, many settled in regions we now know as Denmark, which literally means Dan's mark, and other parts of Europe. But here's the detail that will make you lose your breath. When Jesus began his ministry, when he called the 12 apostles, none of them came from the tribe of Dan, none. When he sent the 70 disciples, no mention of the tribe of Dan. When the early church began to expand, the tribe of Dan was completely absent. It's as if, at the most crucial moment in human history, when the promised Messiah finally came, the tribe of Dan simply wasn't there. They missed the moment. They missed the opportunity. But do you want to know what chills me most? According to some prophetic interpretations, when the Antichrist comes from the tribe of Dan, he will be the perfect antithesis of Christ. Where Jesus came to save, he will come to destroy. Where Jesus came to unite, he will come to divide. Where Jesus came as a lamb, he will come as serpent. And here's the most terrifying prophecy of all. Some scholars believe that just as Jesus had 12 apostles representing the tribes of Israel, the Antichrist will have 12 evil leaders. And guess which tribe will be represented in the leadership of darkness? Dan. It's as if the entire story were a great cosmic battle between two lineages. The lineage of Judah, from which Christ came, and the lineage of Dan, from which the Antichrist will come. Light against darkness, salvation against condemnation, lamb against serpent. And when we reach Revelation, when God seals the 144,000 to go through the great tribulation, he looks at Dan and says, "No, this tribe chose their side. This tribe made their choice. They will not be among my protected ones." Do you perceive the terrible and perfect justice in this? Dan had every opportunity. They had the same promises as the other tribes. They had the same prophets, the same miracles, the same God. But they chose, consistently, generation after generation, the path of rebellion. And now, at the end times, they will reap exactly what they sowed. While I researched for this video, one question wouldn't leave my mind. And I'm sure now it's also hammering in your hearts. If God was capable of crossing out an entire tribe from the list of the saved, what does this mean for each of us? Dan started like any other tribe. They had the same opportunities, the same promises, the same love of God, but they made choices, small choices that over time became patterns. Patterns that became curses, curses that became destinies. The difference between us and Dan isn't that we're better or more holy. The difference is that we still have time. We can still break the patterns. We can still renounce generational curses. We can still choose light instead of darkness. But here's the question that will define the rest of your lives. What choices are you making today that will determine where you'll be when the final list is revealed? Dan thought he had time. Dan thought he could play with apostasy and then return. Dan thought God would be obligated to save them for being Abraham's descendants. Dan was wrong. And if this video reached you today, maybe it's because God is giving one last opportunity for you not to make the same mistake as Dan. If this revelation touched your heart, if something inside you moved hearing this story, share this video. Because maybe, just maybe, someone you love needs to hear this before it's too late. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now, because we have many more revelations like this to share. Revelations that can completely change your understanding of God's Word. Leave in the comments, after hearing Dan's story, what patterns in your life do you need to break? What curses do you need to renounce? What choices do you need to make differently? Because time is running out, and the list of the 144,000 may be being written right now.